Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into a fascinating and a bit intense aspect of Islamic law, the concept of blood-wit.
Yeah.
We'll be exploring this through the lens of Sunan Abu Dawud, specifically Hadith Book 34, which is entirely dedicated to types of blood-wit.
That's right. It's a deep dive into how early Muslims, guided by the Prophet Muhammad's teachings and rulings, dealt with the serious matters of death and injury.
Right.
And it might surprise you to learn that this idea of blood-wit, a system of compensation for causing harm, isn't unique to Islam. You'll find echoes of it in various cultures throughout history, reflecting a common human need to address these sensitive issues within a legal framework.
Exactly. And, I was thinking about our listeners.
Right.
You specifically.
Yeah.
Whether you're coming at this from a religious perspective, a historical curiosity, or even an interest in legal systems, this deep dive has something for you. It's a window into how a society in transition, moving from tribal customs to a divinely revealed legal system, grapple with the complexities of justice.
What's fascinating here is how these hadiths, these recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, offer us a glimpse into the social fabric of early Islamic society.
Okay.
We see how they navigated the shift from pre-Islamic traditions, often marked by inequality and a focus on tribal affiliations, to a system emphasizing fairness, individual accountability, and often, surprisingly, forgiveness.
Okay, so let's jump right into the text. The first section of Book 34 seems to be all about establishing this foundational principle of equity.
Right.
And it starts with a story about two Jewish tribes, Qurayza and Nadir, in Hadith 4479.
Right. This hadith paints a vivid picture of the pre-Islamic system.
Okay.
It tells us that if a man from the tribe of Qurayza, considered less wealthy, killed a man from the more affluent Nadir tribe, the punishment was death. But if a Nadir man killed someone from Qurayza, a mere payment of baits was considered sufficient. So as you can imagine, this system clearly favored the wealthier tribe, highlighting the disparity and injustice that often prevailed before Islam.
It's a stark contrast to what we see emerge with the arrival of Islam.
Right.
So how do things change?
Well, this hadith continues with a crucial moment. A man from Nadir kills a man from Qurayza, and the people turn to the Prophet Muhammad for judgment. This was a real test, a defining moment for how this new faith would address the inequalities of the past.
And this is where divine revelation comes in, right?
Exactly.
The Quranic verse is revealed that completely changes the game.
Exactly. The verse, "If thou judge in equity between them," establishes a radical principle for the time, equality before the law, regardless of wealth or social status.
Wow.
This was a huge departure from the old ways where your tribe and your wealth often determine the outcome of legal disputes.
So no more favoritism based on who you are or how much money you have.
Right.
Everyone is treated equally under this new Islamic system.
And to further emphasize this break from the past,
the
hadith also mentions a subsequent verse that refers to the old ways as the judgment of ignorance.
Right.
It's a powerful statement drawing a clear line between the pre-Islamic practices and the new system guided by divine revelation and a commitment to justice and fairness.
It's almost like they're saying, we're doing things differently now.
Right.
And it's all about creating a more just society for everyone.
Yeah.
So we see this clear shift towards a more equitable system of justice.
Right.
But how does that play out on an individual level?
Well, the next hadith, Hadith 4480, brings us to a seemingly lighthearted encounter between the Prophet and a man named Abu Rimtha and his father.
I love this one. The Prophet smiles at the striking resemblance between father and son.
Yeah.
And then the father swears an oath, and it's all very human and relatable.
It is. It reminds us that these legal rulings weren't just abstract concepts. They were being applied to real people in their everyday lives. But within this heartwarming anecdote lies a profound teaching reinforced by a powerful Quranic verse. No bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure.
What does this verse actually mean in the context of justice?
It's a clear rejection of collective punishment. This principle emphasizes individual accountability. Each person is responsible for their own actions, and no one else can carry that burden for them. So you're not judged by your family's actions, your tribe's history, or your social standing. You are responsible for what you do.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It aligns with the idea of fairness and a just system where people are judged solely on their own deeds.
Right.
It seems like such a fundamental concept to us now.
Yeah.
But it must have been revolutionary in 7th century Arabia.
Absolutely. This emphasis on individual accountability was a radical departure from the prevailing norms of tribal societies,
Right.
where collective responsibility often dictated legal outcomes. Imagine a system where you could be punished for the actions of your relatives or tribe members,
Right.
even if you had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
This verse puts an end to that.
Right.
And it resonates with the values of many modern legal systems today.
So we've seen how Islamic law establishes equity, treating everyone equally, regardless of background,
Right.
and emphasizes individual accountability.
Yeah.
But what happens when a crime is committed?
Okay.
Specifically when someone is killed?
Mhm.
Does it become a straightforward eye for an eye situation?
Not at all. Hadith 4481 introduces us to a more nuanced approach.
Okay.
It outlines 3 distinct options available to the relatives of a slain person.
Okay.
They can choose retaliation,
Well.
they can choose forgiveness,
Well.
or they can accept compensation.
It's almost like a menu of justice,
Right.
offering different paths to address the harm that's been done.
Yeah.
But even with these options,
Right.
there's a clear warning against exceeding the limits, right?
Yes. The Hadith uses the term kabal, which literally means a wound.
But to illustrate the concept of proportional response,
Okay.
the Prophet emphasizes that going beyond the permissible limits of these options,
Right.
Whether it's excessive retaliation or demanding unreasonable compensation,
Yeah.
will result in severe consequences.
Mhm.
It's a crucial point because it highlights that justice, while demanding accountability,
Right.
is not about vindictive vengeance.
So it's about striking a balance
Yes.
between acknowledging the need for retribution
Ah.
and urging restraint and proportionality.
Exactly.
And it seems like forgiveness is a recurring theme in the Prophet's teachings,
That's right.
even in cases as serious as murder.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hadith 4482 beautifully captures this emphasis on forgiveness.
Okay.
It tells us that whenever a case involving retaliation was brought before the Prophet,
Right.
he consistently encouraged the aggrieved party to choose pardon over vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
He saw reconciliation as the preferred outcome,
Yeah.
recognizing its potential to heal wounds and restore balance within the community.
Yeah.
It's almost so he's saying, yes, you have a right to demand justice,
Yeah.
but there's a higher path, a more spiritually rewarding path that lies in forgiveness.
Exactly. It's a powerful message that resonates across cultures and time periods.
yeah,
It's about recognizing that while justice requires addressing the harm that's been done,
Right.
true healing often comes through mercy and a willingness to break the cycle of violence.
Right.
And this theme of forgiveness becomes even more vivid in the next set of hadiths,
okay.
where we encounter a series of real-life cases and the Prophet's wisdom in navigating these complex situations.
These are the ones I find most compelling.
Yeah,
Almost like little dramas filled with intrigue and moral dilemmas.
right.
They bring the principles we've been discussing to life in a way that's both captivating and thought-provoking.
You're right. They are fascinating. Hadiths 4483 through 4487 present us with a series of case studies,
Okay.
each one revealing a different facet of the Prophet's approach to justice and the emphasis he placed on forgiveness and reconciliation.
Let's start with Hadith 4483, the story of the accidental killer.
Okay.
It's a powerful example of how the Prophet intervenes to prevent further bloodshed,
Absolutely.
even when a life has been lost.
In this case, a man accidentally kills another man.
Right.
And the victim's guardian is understandably distraught, seeking vengeance.
Yeah.
But the Prophet, recognizing the unintentional nature of the act, steps in
Right.
and urges the guardian to consider the consequences of taking another life.
It's a crucial reminder that justice isn't just about blindly applying a set of rules.
Right.
It's about understanding the context,
Yeah.
the intentions behind the actions,
Right.
and the potential for causing further harm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about showing mercy even when it's difficult.
And that theme of mercy continues in Hadiths 4484 and 4485.
Okay.
We see the Prophet repeatedly encouraging forgiveness.
Okay.
Even when the victim's family initially refuses, he patiently explains the spiritual benefits of pardoning the offender,
Yeah.
highlighting the transformative power of this act.
Yeah. It's as though he's saying that forgiveness isn't just a gift to the person who wronged you.
Yeah.
It's also a gift to yourself.
Right.
It's a way to break free from the chains of anger and resentment and find peace.
And the Hadith even goes further, suggesting that there's a divine reward for those who choose to forgive.
Okay.
It speaks to the interconnectedness of our actions
Right.
and the ripple effects they have within a community.
Yeah.
When we forgive, we contribute to a more harmonious and compassionate society.
And then we have Hadith 4486, which involves the unintentional killing of an Abyssinian slave.
Okay.
It's a particularly poignant case because it highlights the vulnerability of those who were often marginalized in society.
It's a remarkable example of how the Prophet's teachings sought to protect those who might otherwise be overlooked.
Okay.
The fact that the victim was a slave doesn't diminish the value of his life or the need for justice.
Right.
The Prophet intervenes, not only to ensure that the perpetrator faces consequences, but also to prevent any further harm to the slave himself.
It's a holistic approach to justice.
Yeah.
Considering the well-being of everyone involved.
Right.
And it sends a clear message. Justice applies to all, regardless of social standing.
And finally, we have the powerful testimony of Uthman ibn Affan, a close companion of the Prophet and later a caliph, as recounted in Hadith 4487.
Right.
He was under siege facing imminent danger. And in his defense, he invokes the core principles of Islamic justice.
It's a dramatic moment. He specifically mentions the 3 permissible reasons for taking a Muslim life.
Yeah.
Disbelief after accepting Islam, adultery after marriage, and wrongful killing.
Exactly.
And his defense rests on his unwavering adherence to these principles.
Right.
He asserts that he has not committed any of these acts, and therefore should not be unjustly killed.
Yeah.
It's a powerful testament to the importance of due process and the rule of law, even in the most turbulent of times.
So we've seen a lot about retaliation, forgiveness,
Uh-huh.
and the Prophet's consistent emphasis on choosing mercy whenever possible.
Yeah.
But what about the actual payment of blood money?
Right.
That seems like a crucial part of this whole system.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to learn how that worked in practice.
I am too, and I think our listeners are too.
Yeah.
So we'll have to save that for next time.
Okay.
So join us again for part 2 of this deep dive as we continue to explore the fascinating world of blood-wit in Islamic law.
Looking forward to it.
See you then.
Okay. So we've seen how Islamic law approaches justice in cases of murder, emphasizing both individual accountability and the possibility of forgiveness.
Right.
Now let's delve into that third option available to the victim's family, accepting compensation, also known as blood money.
Okay. I'm really curious about this.
Yeah.
Is it like a set price list for different offenses? Or how did they figure out how much blood money was owed in a particular case?
That's what makes this so fascinating. It wasn't like Islam came with a pre-existing price list for every injury or death.
Right.
It was a system that developed organically. Okay.
And we can actually see this evolution through the hadiths themselves.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So where do we see the concept of blood money appearing for the first time in these hadiths?
Hadith 4488 offers us a glimpse into that very first instance where blood money is decided upon by the Prophet Muhammad. And it's not a simple, straightforward situation.
Okay.
It involves a killing between 2 different tribes.
Right.
And there's a lot of resistance to the idea of accepting payment instead of seeking revenge.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Remember, this is a society where tribal honor and vengeance were deeply ingrained.
Wow. I can only imagine the tension in that situation.
Yeah.
So how did it play out? Who are these tribes and what happened?
The hadith tells us that a man from the tribe of Muhallam killed a man from the tribe of Ashjas.
Okay.
As you can imagine, the Ashja tribe, the victim's tribe, was outraged.
Yeah.
They wanted the killer to pay with his life. They wanted revenge, pure and simple.
Right.
Which was the traditional way of dealing with such situations. I can understand their feelings.
Yeah.
It must have been hard to let go of that desire for vengeance.
Yeah.
Especially when it's so deeply ingrained in your culture.
Right.
So how did the Prophet navigate this?
Well, this is where we see his remarkable skills as a peacemaker and a bridge builder.
Okay.
He recognized the need to uphold justice.
Right.
While also finding a way to prevent further violence and bloodshed between the tribes.
Right.
So he negotiated a settlement, a payment of blood money to be paid by the Muhallam tribe to the Ashjas tribe.
That sounds like a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how he managed to bridge the gap between those 2 opposing desires, the desire for revenge and the need for a peaceful resolution.
Right.
Did it work? Did the Ashja tribe accept the blood money?
They did, but it wasn't easy.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The hadith tells us that the Prophet himself contributed part of the blood money.
Wow.
He put his own resources into the settlement, demonstrating his commitment to resolving the conflict and setting a powerful precedent for future cases.
Yeah, that's incredible. He didn't just talk the talk. He walked the walk, showing everyone how important reconciliation was to him.
Yeah.
It's a powerful statement about leadership.
Right.
Putting your own resources behind the principles you're preaching.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this act had a ripple effect.
Sure.
Hadiths 4489 and 4490 show us how this choice between blood money and retaliation gradually became established practice within the growing Muslim community. It wasn't about forcing a new law upon people. It was about working with them, understanding their concerns, and finding a way to integrate this concept of compensation into their existing framework of justice.
So it's a process of evolution, not revolution?
Right.
It's about meeting people where they are and gradually shifting the culture towards a more peaceful and just way of resolving conflict.
Exactly.
That's a really insightful way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this system of blood money in place. What else can we learn from these hadiths about how it worked in practice?
Well, things take a darker and more complex turn when we come to the story of the poisoned sheep.
Oh, yeah.
Recounted in hadiths 4493 through 4500.
Right.
It's a chilling account that raises questions about the limits of forgiveness, the nature of divine knowledge, and the lasting consequences of harmful actions.
Oh, yeah, that's the one that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It's a bold move by that Jewish woman to offer a poisoned sheep to the prophet, to say the least. It's almost like something out of a Shakespearean play.
It's certainly a dramatic story.
Yeah.
And it has captured the imaginations of scholars and commentators for centuries.
Right.
What's particularly intriguing is that the prophet seems to be aware of the poison, possibly through divine revelation or some other form of knowledge beyond the ordinary.
Okay.
And despite this knowledge, he warns others not to eat the meat.
But some people do eat it, right? And some of them even die.
Yes. And this is where the accounts get a bit complicated. Some of the hadiths suggest that the prophet forgave the woman who poisoned the sheep, while others suggest that she was punished. It's one of those instances where the historical transmission of these events, passed down orally for generations before being written down, has resulted in varying accounts.
It can be confusing trying to reconcile these different versions.
That's right.
So how do we make sense of these seemingly contradictory accounts?
Well, it's a reminder that historical narratives are rarely neat and tidy. Right. It's not always about finding one definitive, correct version.
Yeah.
Instead, we're invited to consider these different perspectives and grapple with the complexities of interpreting events from the past.
Right.
The very fact that these variations exist tells us something about the challenges of preserving historical memory and the ongoing process of interpretation and reinterpretation.
So it's not just about what happened, but also about how these events were remembered, retold, and eventually recorded.
It adds another layer of depth to these hadiths, inviting us to think critically about the sources themselves and the process of transmission.
And then there's the question of the prophet's own experience.
Right.
The hadiths tell us that he suffered long-term health problems as a result of the poisoning.
Oh, wow.
And he even stated that it ultimately led to his death.
That adds a layer of tragedy to the story, doesn't it?
It does.
Even if he forgave the woman in the immediate aftermath, the consequences of her actions continue to impact him for years to come.
It does.
Yeah.
And it raises all sorts of questions about the nature of forgiveness, the interplay of free will and divine decree, and the lasting impact of harmful actions.
Right.
It's a story that continues to resonate with Muslims today, prompting reflection and contemplation on these complex themes.
It's a powerful reminder that forgiveness, while a noble and virtuous act, doesn't erase the harm that's been done.
Right.
The consequences can linger both physically and emotionally.
Okay, so we've seen how blood money works in cases of murder. And we've explored this complex and multi-layered story of the poisoned sheep.
Right.
What other situations do these hadiths address?
Well, the next set of hadiths, 4001 to 40504, shines a light on a particularly vulnerable group within society. Slaves.
Okay.
And the message is crystal clear. Harming a slave is treated with the same severity as harming a free person.
That's a powerful statement about human dignity and equality.
Yes.
Especially considering the context of the time.
Right.
It challenges the notion that slaves were somehow less worthy of protection or justice.
Absolutely. And the hadith uses strong, even graphic language to drive this point home.
Okay.
It states that if someone kills their slave, they will be killed in retaliation. If they cut off their slave's nose, their own nose will be cut off.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder of the seriousness with which Islamic law views the protection of all individuals, regardless of their social status.
It's like they're saying, look, we're not messing around here. The consequences for harming anyone, especially those who are most vulnerable, are going to be severe.
Exactly. It's about deterrence.
Okay.
It's about establishing a system where the potential consequences are so significant that people will think twice before harming anyone.
Right.
Especially those who are most vulnerable and might not have the means to protect themselves.
And there's that specific story about a slave who was castrated.
Right.
And was subsequently granted his freedom right.
Yeah.
It highlights this idea of collective responsibility for the well-being of those who are most susceptible to harm.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's Hadith 4502, and it's a fascinating case study.
Okay.
The act of castration was considered such a grievous offense that it not only warranted severe punishment for the perpetrator, but also resulted in the slave being emancipated.
Wow.
It's a powerful statement about the community's obligation to protect the vulnerable.
Right.
And to ensure their well-being, even if it means removing them from a potentially dangerous situation.
It goes beyond simply punishing the offender.
Right.
It's about seeking justice for the victim.
Yeah.
And in this case, justice included freedom from a horrific situation.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered murder, poisoning, harm to slaves. Are there any other situations where these hadiths shed light on how Islamic justice worked?
Well, there are times when things are less straightforward.
Okay.
What happens when a crime is committed?
Yeah.
But there's no clear evidence, no witnesses, no confession.
Right.
How do you determine guilt and administer justice in such a situation? That's where the concept of qasama comes into play.
Qasama, that's a new one.
Yeah.
Break that down for me.
Okay.
What is it and how does it work?
It's a fascinating system, and it's detailed in Hadiths 4505 to 4511.
Okay.
Essentially, qasama is a system of oaths used when there's a lack of clear evidence to determine guilt or innocence.
Okay.
If a crime is committed and the perpetrator is unknown, members of the community can be called upon to swear oaths, either to attest to their own innocence or to point suspicion towards someone else.
So it's like bringing the collective knowledge of the community into the process.
Yeah.
Leveraging their understanding of the situation and the people involved.
Right.
To try to get at the truth.
Exactly.
That's pretty ingenious. Do we see an example of this in the hadiths?
Yes, we do. And it's a particularly compelling case.
Okay.
Because it involves the death of a man in Khaybar, a Jewish settlement.
Okay.
And it highlights the complexities of navigating justice when accusations are made against members of another religious community.
Okay, now this sounds like a real legal drama.
Yeah.
Give me the details.
Okay.
What happened, and how did they apply this system of qasma?
The hadith describes how a man was found dead in Khaybar.
Okay.
And there was no clear indication of who was responsible.
Right.
Suspicion fell upon the Jewish community, but proving guilt was extremely difficult.
Yeah.
It was a sensitive situation with the potential to escalate into intercommunal conflict.
I bet. So what did the prophet do?
Well,
did he go ahead and require oaths from the Jewish community?
He initially offered that option, but it presented challenges, particularly because it involved members of another faith.
Yeah.
Ultimately, to avoid further conflict and ensure a just outcome, he made the decision to pay the blood money himself.
Wow.
Taking on the financial burden to resolve the situation.
Wow. That's a powerful statement. It's like he's saying, look, we don't have all the answers, but we still have a responsibility to ensure that justice is served, even if it means making personal sacrifices.
Right.
It speaks volumes about his commitment to fairness and peace.
It does.
Yeah.
And it reinforces this key principle that Islamic justice isn't about rigidly applying a set of rules in every situation.
Right.
It's about seeking the truth.
Yeah.
Considering the context.
Yeah.
And finding solutions that uphold fairness and prevent further harm, even if it requires flexibility and creative problem solving.
It's a nuanced and flexible system.
Right.
Adapting to the specific circumstances of each case.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how these hadiths offer such a detailed glimpse into how it worked in practice.
Yeah, it really is fascinating.
Okay, so we've talked about retaliation, forgiveness, blood money, and this system of oaths. What other aspects of Islamic justice do these hadiths eliminate?
Well, next we'll delve into a few specific cases that illustrate the concept of retaliation and its limitations.
Okay.
It's important to remember that retaliation, while permitted in certain situations, is not encouraged in Islam. It's considered a last resort, and even then, there are strict guidelines to prevent it from spiraling out of control or becoming an instrument of cruelty.
It sounds like they were trying to walk that fine line between acknowledging the human desire for retribution while also emphasizing restraint and proportionality.
Exactly. One of the hadiths, Hadith 45112, describes a case where a young girl was found murdered. And the method used in retaliation mirrored the brutality of the crime itself.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that even in a system based on justice, there's a potential for violence.
Right.
And a need for constant vigilance to prevent it from becoming excessive.
It's unsettling to think about, but it's important to acknowledge these darker aspects. And to understand how they fit into the broader context.
Right.
So how do we reconcile this seemingly brutal act of retaliation with the principles of mercy and forgiveness that we've seen emphasized in other hadiths?
It's a challenging question, and it requires us to view this hadith through the lens of its historical context. This was a society emerging from a long history of tribal warfare and blood feuds, where the idea of proportional retribution was deeply ingrained in the culture. Islamic law in this instance wasn't condoning violence, but rather seeking to regulate it, to establish boundaries and prevent arbitrary or excessive punishment.
So it's a step towards a more civilized and humane system of justice.
Right.
Even if it doesn't completely align with our modern sensibilities.
Exactly.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. It's about taking those steps, however imperfect, towards a more just and compassionate society.
Right.
And it's crucial to remember that even within this context of permissible retaliation, the hadiths consistently emphasize forgiveness as the preferred path, the higher moral ground.
It's like a constant refrain throughout these teachings. Justice demands accountability, but mercy offers true healing.
Precisely. And these hadiths provide us with a valuable glimpse into how early Muslims grappled with these complex moral and ethical dilemmas. Seeking to balance the need for justice with the aspiration for a more compassionate and forgiving society.
It's a fascinating journey through the complexities of Islamic law.
So
far, we've seen how it deals with murder injury. And even situations where there's no clear evidence of who committed the crime. Are there any other specific situations or challenges that these hadiths address?
There are indeed. And in our next segment, we'll explore how Islamic law tackled a range of other issues. From adultery and the rights of non-Muslims to the complexities of compensation for specific injuries and the treatment of those seeking freedom from slavery.
We've been on quite a journey exploring the world of Islamic justice through these hadiths. And it's clear that this system was designed to be both comprehensive and compassionate. But I'm curious, what about some of those situations that might be considered more taboo or sensitive? How did Islamic law handle issues like adultery, for instance?
Well, you're right to point that out. Adultery is a topic that carries a lot of weight and can evoke strong emotions. Hadiths 4517 and 4518 shed light on how this sensitive matter was addressed. And it might surprise you to learn that even in this situation, Islamic law emphasizes restraint and due process.
I'm all ears. What do these hadiths tell us?
They present a scenario where a man finds someone with his wife, a situation that could easily lead to violence or rash actions driven by jealousy and rage. But what's remarkable is that the Prophet Muhammad explicitly forbade immediate killing in such a circumstance.
So it's not a free pass to take the law into your own hands, even in a moment of intense emotion.
Exactly. The hadith makes it clear that even when dealing with something as emotionally charged as adultery, justice must prevail. And justice requires evidence, a fair hearing, and a measured response. It's not about condoning the act of adultery, but rather about ensuring that accusations are substantiated and that punishment is meted out only after a proper process has been followed.
That makes a lot of sense. You don't want someone being falsely accused or punished based on hearsay or suspicion. So how did they ensure that justice was served fairly and impartially in such cases? What kind of evidence was required?
The hadith specifies a very high standard of proof. 4 witnesses, and not just any witnesses. They had to be credible individuals who could testify to having directly witnessed the act of adultery.
Wow.
This requirement aimed to prevent false accusations and protect the rights of all parties involved.
4 witnesses. That's a pretty high bar to clear.
It is.
It really highlights the emphasis on evidence-based justice. And the need to avoid rushing to judgment based on assumptions or rumors. It's a principle that resonates with modern legal systems as well.
Absolutely. The goal was to create a system that was fair, transparent, and protected individuals from being unjustly accused or punished.
Right.
And this commitment to fairness extended to a wide range of situations, including cases involving accidental injury.
Okay.
Hadith 4519 presents a scenario where a zakat collector, someone responsible for collecting charitable alms, accidentally injures someone while carrying out his duties.
Okay, so even those performing a religious obligation weren't exempt from the law if they caused harm.
No, not at all.
Did the collector face consequences for his actions, or did he get a free pass because he was collecting zakat?
Not at all. The Prophet intervened to mediate the situation and ensure that the injured party received appropriate compensation. And what's interesting here is that he didn't just impose a settlement from a position of authority. He actively sought community consensus. Even increasing the compensation amount to reach a resolution that satisfied everyone involved.
And another example of that emphasis on transparency and fairness that we've seen throughout these hadiths. It wasn't just about following a rigid set of rules. It was about finding solutions that addressed the harm that had been done, while also taking into account the perspectives and needs of everyone involved.
And this commitment to transparency and accountability extended even to those in positions of leadership. Hadiths 4521 and 4522 offer a remarkable glimpse into this principle. These hadiths tell stories of both the Prophet Muhammad and Caliph Umar, his successor, offering themselves for retaliation after accidentally striking someone.
Wait, seriously, the leaders of the community were willing to subject themselves to the same laws as everyone else, even for something as seemingly minor as an accidental strike.
That's precisely what these hadiths suggest. It's a powerful statement about the Islamic ideal of a just society, where no one is above the law, regardless of their status or position. It sets a high standard for leadership, emphasizing humility, accountability, and a willingness to be held responsible for one's actions, even unintentional ones.
It's a far cry from the systems we see in many parts of the world where the powerful often act with impunity. This emphasis on leadership accountability is truly remarkable and sets a precedent that many could learn from even today.
And these hadiths remind us that justice isn't about punishment alone. It's also about restoration, about righting wrongs and finding ways to move forward. This idea is beautifully illustrated in Hadith 4523, where the Prophet encourages forgiveness, even extending it to women in cases of murder.
Wow, that's significant, especially in a society where women often had limited legal rights. This suggests a recognition of their agency and moral authority, even in matters of life and death.
Absolutely. It challenges the common misconception that early Islamic society was inherently patriarchal, and highlights the active role women played in legal proceedings. They weren't just passive bystanders, they had the right to forgive, a right that could profoundly impact the outcome of a case.
It's a powerful statement about the value and dignity accorded to women within this legal framework. Okay, so we've seen how this system handles adultery, accidental injury, and even holds leaders accountable. But let's get into the nitty-gritty details. How exactly was the amount of blood money determined? Did they have a standardized system, or was it more of a case-by-case thing?
You've hit on one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole system. Hadiths 4526 through 4539 offer a detailed breakdown of the amounts of blood money specified for various offenses, particularly accidental killing. And you might find this surprising, but the primary unit of measurement was camels.
Camels? Seriously? Not gold coins or some other form of currency?
Camels were a valuable commodity in 7th century Arabia, representing wealth status and practicality. They were essential for transportation trade and sustenance. So it makes sense that they would serve as a standard for measuring compensation.
So it wasn't just about handing over any old camel, right? I imagine there were different types of camels, different ages, different values.
You're absolutely right. The hadiths specify the types and ages of camels required, ranging from young females to mature males, with their value fluctuating accordingly. A young female camel known as a hiqua was considered less valuable than a mature male known as a jamal. It's like a whole system of camel economics embedded within the legal framework.
That's incredible. It's like they had a whole science dedicated to assessing the value of camels for legal purposes. It must have been quite a sight to see settlements being negotiated and paid out in camels.
I can imagine. And the hadiths also mention alternative forms of payment, including dinars and dirhams, gold and silver coins,
Okay.
as well as cows, sheep, clothing, and even wheat.
Wow.
It shows a degree of flexibility, accommodating different forms of wealth and resources within the community.
So there was a recognition that not everyone had herds of camels at their disposal.
Right.
And this system adapted to those economic realities.
Yeah.
But did this system of camel-based compensation stay the same over time, or did it evolve?
Well, like any system, it wasn't static.
Right.
It adapted to changing circumstances.
Okay.
One of the hadiths mentions that Caliph Umar, who succeeded the Prophet Muhammad,
Right.
made some adjustments to the system due to economic factors.
Mm.
It seems that camels had become more expensive,
Okay.
so he updated the payment amounts to reflect those changes.
It's fascinating to see how the system evolved to stay relevant and practical.
Yeah.
It reinforces the idea that Islamic law wasn't meant to be a rigid, unchanging set of rules.
Right.
It was designed to be dynamic, capable of responding to the changing needs of the community and the realities of the time.
And this responsiveness is evident in how the system addressed specific injuries.
Okay.
Hadiths 4540 through 4550 provide a detailed breakdown of the compensation amounts for various injuries.
Okay.
And the level of detail is astonishing.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. Give me some examples. What kind of injuries are we talking about, and how do they determine the compensation?
Well, the hadiths establish a principle that each finger is equal in value,
Okay.
with 10 camels as compensation for the loss of a finger.
Wow.
They also specify amounts for the loss of teeth,
Right.
injuries to the nose, hand, foot, and even head wounds.
Like they had a whole anatomical price list.
It is quite detailed.
They must have had some skilled physicians involved in assessing the severity of injuries and determining the appropriate compensation.
And what's remarkable is that the hadiths don't shy away from addressing even the most sensitive and complex cases.
Okay.
Hadiths 4551 through 4563 delve into the challenging issue of blood money for an unborn child.
Wow, that's a heavy topic.
Yeah.
How do they even approach that? Do they recognize the unborn child as having a right to compensation?
It's a delicate issue that has generated much discussion and debate over the centuries.
Right.
One hadith describes a case brought to the Prophet where a woman kills another woman and her unborn child.
Okay.
The Prophet ruled that a slave should be paid as compensation for the unborn child, recognizing its value as a life.
So even in its earliest days, Islamic law recognized the sanctity of life in the womb, at least to some degree.
Right.
It's a concept that continues to be debated and discussed even today.
And it's important to note that the hadiths use the term imlas,
Okay.
which can be translated as abortion. And there were different opinions regarding its definition and whether compensation was required in all cases. It reflects the complexity of the issue and the ongoing process of interpretation within Islamic jurisprudence.
It's a reminder that even within a seemingly clear-cut system of law, there's room for nuanced debate and interpretation.
Right.
It's not always about finding a single definitive answer,
Yeah.
but rather about engaging in thoughtful discussion and seeking guidance from learned scholars.
And these hadiths provide us with a framework for those discussions, offering principles and precedents that can inform our understanding of these complex issues.
Okay, so we've talked about unborn children. What other situations do these final hadiths address?
Well, hadiths 4564 and 4565 shed light on the unique status of a mukatab,
Okay.
a slave who has entered into an agreement with their master to purchase their freedom. The hadith establishes a sliding scale for their blood money based on how much they've paid towards their freedom.
So the closer they are to freedom, the higher the compensation. That's interesting. It seems to recognize their evolving status and the value they've already invested in their own liberation.
Exactly. It's a recognition of their inherent human dignity and the steps they've taken towards self-ownership.
Okay.
And hadith 4566 addresses the blood money for a dhimmi, a non-Muslim living under Muslim rule, stating that their blood money is half that of a free Muslim.
That's a reflection of the different legal status they held within the Islamic system.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that it still recognizes the value of their life and the need for compensation in cases of wrongful death.
Precisely. It reflects the complexities of governing a multi-religious society. And the challenges of balancing religious principles with the practical realities of ensuring justice and protection for all citizens.
And then we have hadiths 4567 and 4568, which present scenarios where retaliation is not permitted, such as when defending oneself from an animal bite.
These hadiths highlight the importance of context and the right to self-defense. It recognizes that harming someone in self-preservation is not a punishable offense.
And Hadiths 4569 and 4570 deal with the issue of medical malpractice,
Right.
warning against those who practice medicine without proper knowledge.
Yeah.
Seems like this was a concern even back then.
It certainly was. These hadiths emphasize the importance of expertise and accountability even in the realm of healthcare.
Okay.
Recognizing the potential for harm when unqualified individuals attempt to provide medical treatment.
And then we have a series of rulings in the final hadiths, 4571 through 4578,
Right.
covering various scenarios. A reiteration of the blood money for accidental killing, an exception for a slave who committed an offense due to their master's poverty,
Okay.
clarification on blood-wit in cases of death during a chaotic fight,
Right.
and the principle of no compensation for injury caused by an untended animal, a mine, a well, or a spreading fire.
Okay.
There's even a story about retaliation for a tooth and the Prophet's intervention to encourage a settlement.
It's a testament to the comprehensiveness of this system. Its attempt to address a wide range of situations and ensure that justice is served in a way that is both fair and practical.
It's been an incredible journey through the world of Islamic justice. We've covered so much ground, from the fundamental principles of equity and accountability to the intricate details of blood money compensation and the complexities of navigating sensitive issues like adultery and the rights of non-Muslims.
And these hadiths offer us a fascinating glimpse into a legal system that was deeply rooted in its social context,
Right.
striving to balance the needs of individuals with the well-being of the community as a whole.
Right.
It's a system that emphasizes fairness, compassion, and a commitment to resolving conflict peacefully.
It's a reminder that even though these texts were compiled centuries ago,
Right.
they still have much to teach us about the timeless principles of justice, mercy,
Yeah.
and the pursuit of a more harmonious society.
And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I encourage you, our listeners, to continue exploring these hadiths and other Islamic texts. There's a wealth of knowledge and wisdom waiting to be discovered.
So to our listeners, keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and keep exploring the rich tapestry of Islamic thought and tradition. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of knowledge and ideas.